Hello, I'm Caroline Fairchild, and welcome to LinkedIn News Live, where the business conversation begins with you. If you ask any leader, they'll tell you that climbing the corporate ladder takes sacrifice. And if you ask a female leader, the sacrifices multiply. My next guest knows this very well, Indra Nooyi, who became the first woman of color and immigrant to lead a Fortune 50 company. Indra is the former chairman and CEO of PepsiCo, a position she held for 12 out of the 24 years she spent at the company. She now holds various board positions, including at companies like Amazon and Philips, and she's the author of her memoir, My Life in Full. Indra holds an MBA from the Indian Institute of Management, Calcutta, and a master's in public and private management from Yale School of Management. Indra, welcome to LinkedIn News Live.
Thank you for having me, Caroline.
I've been looking forward to this conversation for a month practically since I was sent your book, and I'm so excited to dive into it with you. Let's start with the beginning of the book. You start out chronicling your childhood growing up in India in a multi-generational family, just a very uncommon experience for most American execs. How did that initial experience shape your career?
Well, in many ways, I'm a product of my upbringing, because growing up in that sheltered family structure where there was a lot of discipline, but there was also a lot of freedom within a frame, was instrumental in making me feel like I could do whatever I wanted, but I had the anchor of home to come back to. I also had the men in my family who believed that women should be supported, that they should not be discriminated against and treated differently than the boys in the house. So we were allowed to go to college, do whatever we wanted in terms of extracurricular activities, and we were encouraged to do all that. And we had a mother who had both a foot on the brake and a foot on the accelerator. The brake was because she was part of the society and needed to get us married at age 18. Accelerator was she would have loved for us to soar and be whatever we wanted, because I think vicariously she wanted to live her life through us. So we had this interesting contrast between the brake and the accelerator, and somehow we knew that we could do whatever we wanted, but had the comfort and the anchor of home for us to always rely on. So I think it was a great childhood, Caroline. I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world.
It sounded like a great childhood, but there were some traumas that happened as well. Speaking of the men in your life, your father, he was in a Vespa accident when you were very young. And you wrote in the book that you don't think your life would have shaped out the way that it did if your father didn't recover from that accident. What did you mean by that?
Well, my mother was a stay-at-home mother, and my father was the primary breadwinner. And this accident, when we were quite young, was pretty traumatic on the family in retrospect. Then, dad was in an accident. He came home after many months in the hospital, or many weeks in the hospital, I should say. And he was mending slowly at home. We had no physical therapist then. Mom was everything. She kept home, took care of everybody, and was his physical therapist. And had he not recovered from the accident, and had he lost his livelihood, because he couldn't go back to work, I don't know how we would have made ends meet. I don't know what our private school education would have been all about, because we couldn't have afforded it. And I don't know whether we could have even stayed in school. I guess we would have gone to some lower price school, but our life would have been different. And so I think that in a way, I'm just glad my dad recovered. I'm glad he went back to work. But in retrospect, thinking about the accident, I think it was a narrow escape for all of us.
I'm glad he recovered as well. And I read so many stories in the book about how he supported you throughout your career. But this is uncommon. There's this underpinning that you describe in the book of Indian culture, where there's this dichotomy of women are worshipped, but they're also expected to do most of the labor in the home. You said that no one really asked many questions about that when you were growing up. I'm curious, when you came to the US, did you see the same similarities, or how would you juxtapose those two cultures in terms of this relationship?
It was a challenge, to come here and see, women come into their own, be their own people, be independent. I hadn't seen too much of that in India at that time. I saw women slowly emerging on the business scene, slowly living on their own, but it was the exception, not the rule. So in a way, it was fantastic to come here and see women being able to do whatever they wanted to do. While there were elements of society where women were still doing all the work, I would say that I was seeing many, many more examples of women coming into their own. So for me, it was, wow, this is what life really should be like, where the men and the women can both soar, can both dream, can both aspire to whatever. that's what the US stood for. And that was everybody's hope and dream. So in many ways, for me, I'd come to some sort of a utopia, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, and that dream started when you were studying at Yale, and then you got this job at Booz Allen. And you detail this story about how you decided to wear a sari to work every day. And because of that, your colleagues would leave you behind when they went to client sites. Indra, in the book, you make it sound like that didn't upset you at all. How come that wasn't upsetting for you?
Well, I talked to them and I said I shouldn't go to the client side myself. So had I said I wanted to go to the client side, they'd have taken me along. I have to tell you one thing. The Booz Allen people are fantastic. And I mentioned that in the book, that I worked with an unbelievable group of people. But it was also a time, I'm talking now about 1979 summer, Caroline. This is not 2021. It was 1979 summer. There weren't people like me in consulting at all. There were hardly any women, leave alone an Indian woman who's in a sari with a client in the Midwest. I just felt that as a summer intern in a sari, the fact that I was giving an opportunity to learn strategy and consulting in a fantastic firm like Booz Allen gave me all kinds of opportunities for the future. At the same time, I realized that me showing up in a Midwestern client with a sari, they would have accepted me. Everybody did. Would have been a bit confusing to everybody. So when we talked about going to the client, I said, hey, you know what? I don't think I should go because, it'd just be a distraction from the core agenda. But I learned a lot from Booz Allen, and I worked with an outstanding group of people. So I have nothing negative to say about them.
I tried to work at Booz Allen, but I completely botched my second case study interview when I was in college. So that's how I got in this journalist track, and I'm happy that it happened. And I'm going to say hello to some people who are joining us in the stream. We have Shazia from London, Sherry from San Diego, Kristen from New York City, and Dipti from California. Thanks for joining us here on LinkedIn News Live. I'm here with Indra Nooyi, the former chairman and CEO of PepsiCo, and she just wrote her new memoir, My Life in Full. So if you have any questions about Indra's career, let us know. We'll get those answered on today's show. Indra, what also strikes me about your early career is that you had so many male sponsors who were not just male sponsors in their own right, but they were also very empathetic leaders. And you were able to accrue all of these, but then you say multiple times in the book that you didn't really have a social life. So how did you network? We talked so much about the importance of networking. How did you create these relationships?
Through working in the company. I don't believe I had a network at all outside the company. I'll be honest with you. There was no time to socialize, Caroline. By the time you went to the office, did your job and came back, and then by the time my husband and I just got to know each other, remember we hadn't dated for many years, and by the time we had our first child, there was no time to socialize. And also we didn't have any money to socialize. For us, socializing was the two of us going to a buffet luncheon for $4.99, all you can eat was our idea of socializing. So we didn't do much at all. But all the networks I had was built in the companies I worked in, whether it was Booz Allen, Boston Consulting, where I built a lot of networks because all of us were working long hours. Then in Motorola, networked with my boss. Rather, he hired me and supported me and developed me. And similarly, following him to Motorola, I had this similar experience. So I don't believe we had a social network or a social group we could fall back on. It was more word of mouth about, hey, this person's pretty good at the work she does. And my bosses would talk about me to every available outside organization. In fact, Gerhard Schulmeier, who I talk about in the book, used to push me as a speaker when he was not available. Sometimes I wonder why he's doing that. I said, Gerhard, they need you. He says, you can do it. Go do it. And so people like those guys, Gerhard, Carl Stern, pushed me and promoted me and elevated me. And I'm a product of that mentorship too, because they believed in me.
And the underpinning of all that pushing really comes down to empathy, which in the last year has become a central tenet of leadership through this pandemic. And I'm hearing more and more leaders talk about the importance of empathetic leadership. I think back to your boss who lets you take off paid time to go take care of your father in India. How did you align yourself with these men? Was it anything? It strikes me as just like such a coincidence in the book that all these men were so supportive of you, and then you got to where you were in your career.
You know, you're right. In retrospect, looking at this group of experiences I had, I just feel like I lucked into these people. When Carl Stern called me about 6 months paid leave, when my father was dying of cancer, I'm like, I didn't ask for it because I'd barely been in BCG for a year, year and a half. I didn't think I had the right to ask for it. And I was worried, to be honest, about what am I going to do if I have to leave to take care of my dad? How are we going to make ends meet? And how do I re enter a workforce? I was terribly worried about it. But then he called on his own out of the blue and said, Indra, I know you're battling your father's pancreatic cancer. We, BCG, and I'm calling you on behalf of the CEO's office, telling you that we're giving you up to 6 months paid leave. Now, why he did it, how he did it, I don't know. And BCG didn't have a policy on paid leave, but he gave me up to 6 months. You know what? My father died in 3 months. 3 months and one day I was back in the office. So I never abused the 6 months leave and decided to stay home for 6 months. Literally, he died. The next day I was back in the office. So I think that I felt like I owed BCG a duty of care because they treated me so well. And I gave BCG clients my everything. And I think how do you build employee loyalty is what it comes down to. And BCG did a wonderful job when they gave me paid leave, maternity leave, and paid leave again when I had the car accident. So um, maybe I crammed in enough hours in the months that I was not on leave that BCG said she deserves the leave. Whatever it is, they treated me very well.
Absolutely. And speaking of important men in your life, your husband also had to make many sacrifices along the way for your career, but you met and married him rather quickly. Did you know that he had that quality in him? Because it is rare still.
Yeah, you're right. In retrospect, we laugh about it even now. When you meet him, you'll know he's a very, very, very special guy. There's something about him, but I didn't know how special he was until later in life. All that I know is that the summer when I got to know him along with other friends, the way he interacted with them, the way he was helping, the way he was helpful, and our value system, our backgrounds, we came from middle class backgrounds. All of those endeared him to me. But I will tell you that our decision to get married was quite sudden, and we've never looked back. I mean, I always tell him he proposed to me. He always tells me I told him he had to marry me. Doesn't matter. 42 years later, we're still debating this issue, and it doesn't matter who proposed to whom. All that I know is somehow we made it work, Caroline. It wasn't always smooth sailing, but our commitment to each other is complete, and somehow we made it work.
I'm 3 years into my marriage, and I'm learning that you do have to choose your battles there in terms of who's right and who's wrong.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Indra, I've seen a lot of people thankful for this conversation in the stream. Shamira says, you are an absolute inspiration. I couldn't put the book down. Shahana says, reading your book for the second time, very inspirational.
Oh,
Karma says, my favorite part of your book, you were just appointed CEO. You went home and your mom asked you to get milk. I loved, and she said to take your crown off before you come into the home, which I thought was an amazing story. That stays with me. Thank you for sharing your story, and thanks for being with us, Hema. And then I have a question here from Sampada. They're asking, how did you manage to get throughout corporate politics? And do you have a mantra?
Yes, and this is a very important question. Every corporation has politics. There is no corporation without politics. And my plea to everybody is understand the corporate politics, but don't play in the politics. Because let me tell you the difference. Understand who's the informal opinion leader. Understand who likes whom, who doesn't like whom. But don't give your opinion on who you like and don't like. Women in particular should sort of withhold their judgment, because what you don't want is for people to go around saying, Indra also doesn't like that person. Then it all of a sudden went from two people not liking somebody to the focus on Indra. And then it becomes like, what does Indra have to opine on whether she likes somebody or not? So the whole discussion focus changes to you. So my honest suggestion to people is understand the politics. Keep a ear out. What's going on? Who's the power broker here? Understand all of that stuff, but just do your work. Don't try to play in the politics. Don't try to get into the network, because typically when you do that, you end up being the loser, because people start to blame you for things that you never should be blamed for in the first place.
Such great advice. And we often talk about you can't be what you can't see, right? So let's go back to 1994 when you first stepped on to PepsiCo's campus. There wasn't a single female CEO in the Fortune 500. Did you have that vision for yourself back then?
Oh God, no. I mean, I was just delighted to be in a senior management position in a company. I mean, look, coming from my background, yes, I did consulting, I did Motorola and ABB, but remember, I still had that immigrant fear. I still had this feeling of, here I am, so different from everybody else in the boardrooms of corporate America, in the senior management tables. I hope I earn my place in this every day. So I'm coming into work with butterflies in my stomach, and I want to just perform well and hold on to my job. And hopefully that'll get me to a higher level. But I'm not thinking ahead. I'm thinking about, doing a great job as head of strategy, and then whatever's going to happen is going to happen. So I'm focused on today. And I honestly believe, and if we can generalize a lesson from this, if you start off saying, I want to be CEO in 10 years, you're so obsessed with that goal, you forget the job that you have to do. So I would urge everybody, focus on the job you've got. Do a bang up job with the job you've got. And believe me, the rest of it will take care of itself.
Well, you had many important roles at PepsiCo before you became CEO. And one of them that I want to talk about is you were CFO of PepsiCo, which is a role that very few women hold. What needs to happen to get more women into the CFO role specifically, given just how important it is to the ascension to the C-suite and also to board seats?
Well, I tell you, people think of CFO as a finance and accounting job. All right. I don't think so. There's control, tax, and treasury, which are hardcore finance. And then there's the CFO that has to blend a very good knowledge of finance with strategy and think about how to position the company for the long term. And also think about how whatever we're talking to the street can be delivered by the businesses. So you've got to know the business in its detail, all the levers, and you've got to know how the business fits into a macro environment and where it's going. So a good CFO is strategic, understands every lever of the business, knows how to talk to accounting, tax, treasury, but has an independent perspective that that person can articulate to the street, which positions the company in the investor's mind in a very different way than just a accounting way. So if a controller wants to become a CFO, go get some strategic skills. Go work in M&A, go work in corporate strategy. So I think anybody who wants to be a CFO should come in that way. Now, I'll give you an exception. Exception are certain companies make controllers CFO and then make the head of strategy do investor relations and then elevate them. That's okay too. That's what I call an accounting CFO. But if you want to be a strategic CFO that PepsiCo always used to recruit for, you have to come at it slightly differently. Because a CFO is a partner to the CEO.
Right.
You have to elevate your thinking.
Right. It's about reframing the role so that other people are thinking about it. Yeah, exactly. Well, speaking of framing, as a journalist myself, one of my favorite parts of the book is when you talk about how you became very wary of the media early on in your career at PepsiCo. And most recently, a publication wrote I would say clickbaity headline that said that you felt like when you asked for a raise, you thought it was, quote, cringeworthy. Let's talk about what you really meant by that comment and tell me how your relationship with the media has changed over the years.
So first of all, I have two daughters who are both working, and I constantly tell them, make sure you're getting paid fairly, because I believe that doesn't matter if you're a woman or a man. If you're doing a job, everybody should get paid the same for the same job, okay, same level. That's not even a debate. And the fact that women even have to think about the fact that they're not getting paid the same makes me upset. Because I think HR functions should be looking at this very, very carefully all the time and saying everybody who's working the same job should get paid the same amount. Okay, so to me, pay parity is a non-negotiable, has to be there. Now, from my perspective, early in my year in PepsiCo, when I just came on, I was just thrilled to be at the table. Remember, I'm a colored woman, immigrant, coming into the highest levels of one of the most iconic global companies. I was working my tail off. Yes, I was watching other people get stock options. I didn't ask for anything. And the reason I didn't ask for it is because I didn't know how to ask for it. I was making a lot of money, and I'd never seen so much money. And my cultural upbringing never allowed me to go ask somebody for something. Never did. I didn't even know how to do it. And had I had to do it, I would have just struggled to do it because I don't know how to do it. And remember, there was no lean in those days. Nobody taught me how to do those things. Once I became president, Caroline, Steve Reinerman adjusted my pay, my options, everything. And then my pay was public record. The board looks at my pay and decides what I should get. And so I was talking about the time when I didn't get those stock options. Early days, I just didn't know how to ask for it. And my cultural upbringing is what held me back.
Well, I'm glad that you are teaching your daughters to advocate for what they're worth.
Totally.
And speaking of those daughters, you talk about a time in your book where you had some regrets about some of the priorities that you chose. And one story you share is your daughter questioning those priorities. Tell us that story and what your daughter said to you, because I've said it to my mom, who was a single working mother as well, and I feel the pain. So tell us what she said to you and kind of how you dealt with these competing priorities in your life.
I mean, look, it's always a trade-off, and with trade-offs come regrets. There's no question about it. There was one time when my daughter said, "Mom, I wish you could have been here for event A, event B, event C." And both my kids at that time were in stereo telling me that I was missing out too much. So I looked at them and I said, I guess I better quit, because it looks like you guys want me at home all the time. And I was terrified to even say it, but I did say it. And then my kids surprised me. My first one said, "Mom, I didn't mean for you to quit. All that we're saying is, I wish there were two of you. One that we could be so proud of because you're going to work and you're a role model and we can all look up to. And you're pretty cool, Mom, when you go to PepsiCo. On the other hand, we'd also like a full-time mother at home." And my younger daughter said, she just looked at me and she said, "Mom, I love you very much, but you worked so hard to get here, Mom. Dream big." This is my little one who's, wise beyond her years. So I have kids who would like mom full time, but would also like the notion that their mother works and it's pretty cool, as they call it, working at PepsiCo. And so I think they struggle with this dichotomy. But I will say something. When my kids have needed me, I've always been there, always. Whether they had sprained their leg or had a flu or something, I was always there. I never let them down.
Well, the fact that
there's a steady force every minute now.
Well, the fact that you pulled that off, Indra, is insane given your responsibilities at work. I think it was your daughter said that she said that she wishes that you were a quote real mom, which is what I've said to my mom multiple times and definitely have regret over that. Let's bring up a quote that you have in the book about female accomplishment. You wrote, "I think women are held to a different standard from men when it comes to celebrating their professional accomplishments. No matter what we do, we are never quite enough. Getting a promotion or a prize outside the home sometimes seems to mean that either the prize is easy to get or that we are letting our domestic duties slide." Indra, how have you seen this reality? Unfortunately, it is still a reality, even though we're speaking right now in 2021. How have you seen this reality change, and what do you think needs to change for women's successes to be valued equitably?
First of all, I think women have to compliment other women. When you get a prize, I ought to say, "Caroline, that's just fantastic." I mean, the fact that you got this prize with so much competition, I'm in awe of you. We don't do that. Immediately we go, "Oh God, I wonder what those kids in her family are doing," or "She must have not been taking care of her husband," or something. We always think about what else she didn't do in order to earn this prize. So the first thing we've got to do is suspend all of those judgments and then just compliment the person for what they've done and what they've accomplished. Right now, women don't have a critical mass of compliments they get on all these issues, but they get a critical mass of criticism. So I think when the compliments and the critiques sort of balance each other out, I think it'll make us all feel better. And in fact, if you go back to the crown in the garage comment, my mother was, of course, talking about power and humility, but the fact of the matter is, at that time, I bet she wouldn't have said that to my husband. In retrospect, what she was saying was, both of you should feel like you're running the family together. Okay? The fact of the matter is, for a long time, for whatever reason, because of the way society evolved, men got a buy on all this. And the woman was considered primary for family management. Okay? I think now we're at a point where men and women have to work together and say, female and family are two different issues. Family is family. Don't just equate female with family.
Another theme of your book that I think is critical to this discussion is just how overprepared you were to every role that you had at work. You came in to the point in which Indra, you gave a speech at a bowling expo and you bowled before the speech. Like, that's commitment.
Yeah.
How much of that do you think was because of your gender? Did you feel like you had to be overprepared in order to be considered at the same level as some of your male peers?
I think it's gender and just me. I just felt like you don't appear in front of a bowling convention with all of the owners of bowling lanes without really understanding the bowling industry and having something of use to say. And if you're going to say something useful, you better understand this industry and, my BCG training, understand the value drivers, understand the economics of the industry, think of creative ways to grow the top line. So I didn't think I had the right to give a speech in front of the Bowling Proprietors Association until I understood the business, from a different lens, and unless I had something unique to offer to those people myself. Because I felt that's what earns me a right to be on that podium talking to all of them. I was not in the business of just reading a speech. So to me, I took every speech, every appearance very, very seriously and said, if you're coming to this ballroom to listen to me, I better have some nuggets to offer you. Just
Absolutely.
me.
Yeah. So great. Indra, we're having this conversation at a time when we're finally thinking about care as infrastructure in this country.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, we did not pass a paid family leave program like we were discussing just a month ago this time. Where do you feel like we are on this issue right now?
I think that paid leave is something very basic. I'm not even thinking of it as a perk. I'm thinking of it as, how do you have young people create families? We need young people in this country in order to support the aging people, to pay into our social security system. How are we going to get young people if we don't let young people take time off to have kids? I mean, we're not talking about 6 months or a year like other countries. We're saying start with 12 weeks. So I'll be honest with you, I am confused as to why this ran into a roadblock. Now, I'm trying to assume positive intent is saying what people are saying is that we don't know how to pay for it. Big companies might be able to pay for it, the government may be, but small and medium sized enterprises won't know how to pay for paid leave. And until we have a solution, we can't implement it. In which case, the answer should be let's go look for a solution for small and medium sized enterprises, not throw the baby out of the bathwater. So I hope it's a temporary respite and that we bring that discussion right back because we need to give young family builders the time to recover after childbirth, the time to go take care of a aging parent or an ill parent or a child who's sick at home. We need to give them the time. I'm a product of paid leave. I wouldn't be here without paid leave. And I never abused the paid leave. In fact, I gave it back in spades. So I think we have to go back and revisit that paid leave debate. Otherwise, what are we saying to our people? Don't take care of the sick? Don't take care of the aging? Don't take care of your kids? That's not true.
It goes back to the priorities that you discussed
Yeah.
in the book. You're making those priorities. Well, Indra, we didn't get to all of my questions, but on top of all of my questions, there are many, many questions in the stream. So I want to get to at least one of them.
Yeah.
You mentioned immigrant fear at one point, and we have Ketki and Dipti in the stream asking about advice for immigrants entering the corporate world in the US. What advice do you have for them?
Especially if you're an immigrant and you're not fleeing persecution or something, and you willingly came here, I think it's important you realize that you've chosen to come here as I did. And clearly you want to maintain your individuality, but at the same time, you've got to assimilate because you can't come into a totally new country and say the country has to adapt, change for you. You have to adapt and adopt in your new country, which is what I did. What makes me is still me. I still maintain a vegetarian household. I don't smoke, drink. You look at my face, I look Indian. So those parts I'm not going to forget. But I've also blended very, very nicely here. I have a great group of friends now. I'm squarely into American sports. I love music. I love the culture. I love everything about this country. And so how do you blend the two? How do you keep your authenticity and your roots where you need to? And where do you blend into the community too? Because if you don't do that, you're going to be one lonely person. So I honestly believe, as an immigrant, figure out how to straddle both worlds.
Well, we are running out of time, Indra, but very, very, very quickly, I have to ask you this. Speaking of that network, you talk about these dinners you've had since leaving Mexico with fellow female CEOs like Ellen Coleman and Andrea Young. And you said that your paths were different, but similar. Tell us some of the similarities. This is just such a powerful group of women that you happen to be a part of, and I'd love to hear kind of what you have in common with them.
First of all, I know all of them. They're all lovely people. I mean, you have to understand these CEO women in their quiet times. They're all just lovely, smart, brilliant. I know now why all of them became CEOs. All of us have been through similar experiences of unconscious bias or aggressive behavior in the workplace, and somehow we have powered through it all. We were all pioneers. We're among the first women leaders, and we're all committed to making sure we create a future for women leaders and for women coming up the pipeline that is much easier than we had when than we experienced when we came into the workforce. And so all of us are product of mentors, and all of us want to give back to the next generation.
Oh, absolutely. Indra, thank you so much for spending this time with us. I see so many people in the stream grateful as well. Clara says, thank you for sharing a little about yourself. You're very humble and inspiring in so many ways. And Olunai says, your poise and passion is worthy of emulation. And I agree with both of them. Indra, thank you so much for joining us on LinkedIn News Live.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you for having me again.
That was Indra Nooyi. She is the former CEO and chairman of PepsiCo, as well as the author of her recent memoir, My Life in Full: Work, Family, and Our Future. And thank you for all of your comments in the stream. I'm seeing many, many comments and questions. If you want to continue the conversation and check out other stories like these, be sure to check out the news module to the right of your LinkedIn feed. Or if you're in mobile, you can click into that search box. On Thursday at 3 Eastern, my colleagues George Anders as well as Jordan Dahl will be discussing our latest Workforce Confidence Index, what industries are growing and what states are hiring the most. You can check that out here on the LinkedIn news page Thursday at 3 Eastern. I'm Caroline Fairchild. Thank you so much for joining us.